Medal of Honor is a long-running and well-known military first-person shooter franchise that has been around since the late 90s. With its original release on the PlayStation, it focused on World War II, and has since spawned several games in almost all theaters of that war. The franchise hit a high note with Medal of Honor Allied Assault for the PC, released back in 2002, a game that received critical acclaim and won tons of awards. The game had an excellently scripted single-player campaign for its time, and was complete with an incredibly well-developed multiplayer portion that was expanded with 2 equally successful expansion packs. Since then, the franchise has been on a lower scale when compared to other modern releases. Medal of Honor for the Xbox, PS3, and PC is attempting to revive the franchise by introducing players to the modern conflict set in current-day Afghanistan. Will Medal of Honor be able to keep up in today's market with its new and realistic modern focus, or was it better kept in the past? Medal of Honor at its core is a realism-focused first-person shooter that introduces players to the modern conflict through the eyes of a Tier 1 operator, a special forces unit positioned in Afghanistan. The campaign consists of a dozen or so set-piece style linear missions that take the player through a variety of different environments and situations, but unfortunately none of the game's segments feel particularly well thought out or implemented. The campaign's variety is nice, and although they allow you to do many different things, many of these unique portions feel underdeveloped or tacked on. The vehicle sections, for instance, feel relatively pointless, and are over before anything too involving or interesting happens, and there are several set pieces involving stationary weaponry that feel absolutely ancient in design. Another major flaw of the single-player campaign is that it suffers from the classic case of point A to point B syndrome. We've played it a dozen times. You start the mission, kill the endless waves of respawning enemies until the guy in charge tells you to move ahead, and then you repeat. We've entered an age of gaming and storytelling where respawning AI in a linear first-person shooter just isn't acceptable anymore, especially given that even with all of this filler content, the campaign on average still lasts around 4 to 5 hours. The use of respawns and this repetitive system of progressing through levels also destroys many aspects of the game's believability. I've never been to war, but I assume that modern-day soldiers don't stand around fighting off endless waves of the opposing force, and they don't make their plan of actions on the spot as the combat ends. Many of these game flow shortcomings could possibly be forgivable had the gameplay been well developed and enjoyable, but the weapon mechanics and control for the single-player portion of the game feel very half-baked. Most of this seems in part due to the fact that the single-player game engine feels very weak and underdeveloped in comparison with DICE's multiplayer engine. There are loads of visual quirks and several sections where the use of graphical shortcuts is very apparent. The game does have good graphics and has great and believable sound design, but the graphics and sound can't make up for weak gameplay, poor game progression, and an uninspiring story that is never fully developed due to lack of very good characters. There's also a lack of weapons in the game. You're given about 5 weapons throughout the campaign, and can pick up some of the enemy's weapons, but there is no ammo for their weapons. So if you want to continue using enemy weapons, you're forced to pick up a new gun every time you run out of ammo. There's also no kit customization for the single player, and you are only able to use the guns that you start off with for each mission. There are no bonus objectives or incentives to replay the campaign except for an extreme difficulty Tier 1 mode that has a leaderboard system. But these higher difficulties just make you die faster and don't improve the stupid AI or make the campaign any more complete. All in all, the single-player campaign is incredibly forgettable, and you probably won't find yourself crawling back to your PC or your game console with the intentions of playing through it successive times. The multiplayer portion of the game is where it begins to pick itself back up. The multiplayer mode is very similar to that of the Call of Duty franchise, except that it has more of a focus on structured team play and objectives. You are rewarded with experience and ranks, and there are unlocks to achieve throughout your career, but these unlocks are very limited and begin to feel rushed or tacked on. There's never any customization that dramatically changes your gameplay experience or your methods of playing. Above I mentioned that the single-player and multiplayer engines were separate. There's a definite difference between the two, but although the MP engine is improved, weapons still feel relatively light and weak. But the visuals do hold up, and in some cases they actually look better. The PC version of the game comes complete with a server browser, something that should be industry standard, but has for some reason been neglected in previous multi-platform game releases. The gameplay has a bit of a learning curve throughout the game's 4 different multiplayer game types, but players who enjoy playing as a team or playing competitively may find extra enjoyment from the harsher weapon damage and slower pace. The only initial downside, however, is that there are only 8 maps at the game's release with no current promise of community content, something that has easily killed PC games in the past. Now, I hate to review a game with a number value, as I feel that most viewers should be able to weigh the pros and the cons and decide if the game is up to their expectations. But as a whole, I feel the game suffers a lot in the single-player portion of the game. And although the multiplayer is much improved, this is a $60 game we're talking about, and in today's market we expect thorough and well-done content. As a final conclusion, I give the game a 5.9 out of 10. It's a pass, but basically only for the multiplayer, or if you are a very serious shooter fan and must play them all. Pick it up for the multiplayer, but I'm not yet certain of its longevity, so that's at your own risk, especially if you're a PC gamer and are unable to trade in your games.
So it kind of looks like they're trying to set up for another